what got you started with Digital Nomad Girls? What was the idea, and how did you first begin creating that? Because you've made such a powerful community over the years.
Over 9 years ago now, and I had been traveling for over a year, or almost 2 years at that point. I had finished a PhD in chemistry. I'd left all of my science career behind and was traveling, and I'd found out about the digital nomad lifestyle and was very, very interested in it. And there were some communities around digital nomads back then already, but there wasn't a single one for women. And I had found a lot of comfort and advice and support, and yeah, just made really good connections in travel communities, which were for females, like focused for females, because it felt like a really safe space to exchange. And I didn't see that there was anything like that in the digital nomad world, where I was in mixed communities where, let's say, maybe the male participants happened to be a little bit louder than the women in the group. And after being shut down and called like, literally, I think hysterical was one of them once, where I'm like, it's you can't get any more cliche. I was really annoyed, and I was like, I don't wanna do this anymore. I feel like there needs to be I just can't be bothered with this, right? Like, I have questions, I want some answers, I wanna have conversations, and I don't need to be belittled. And to be honest, to go back even a little bit further, I'd studied chemistry, which is a very male-dominated field, and after 10 years of that, I think I really wanted a change. I wanted a space where I didn't have to just fight so much anymore. And I thought there was a need for digital nomad girls, and there was at the time. So I started a Facebook group. I did really not know what I was doing, to be honest, but it sounded like a good idea. And yeah, here we are.
How did well, first, we all relate greatly to this. I mean, this is a huge reason why I started this podcast was there was so much, and I think it's changing a lot now too, but there was so much business advice from the kind of techie bro world. And it felt that some of the topics and issues that come up for us as women were not being discussed, and they weren't being discussed in the way that they needed to be. And also, it felt like a lot of the guests just tended to be men. So we weren't hearing women's stories. So I really resonate with that, creating a space where we can feel safe, where we can go and have our adventures and create our lives without feeling like we have to always communicate in the way that people expect. When you started it and you opened the Facebook group, how did the first few people start coming in? Was it just you created it and then bam, like there's this flood? Or was it you met people along your travels, maybe a mix of stuff? How did it start to really trickle in and then grow?
It's funny because I basically invited my friends, and that meant all my friends actually, whether they were traveling or not, but also a lot of the women that I had met over the years before. Because so my boyfriend and I, we left London after I finished we both did PhDs. We left and went traveling for a year, and then we were in Australia for a year for a working holiday visa as well. So we'd met a lot of people along the way already. So I kind of invited the travelers to the community at first, and then anyone who I was meeting, because at the time when I started DNG, the Facebook group, I was in Thailand already. So I was meeting new people all the time and just telling them about it, and then they'd join. And then I would encourage people, just invite your friends. Like, if you meet anyone, invite them. And that's really how it went. They invited their friends, and then they invited their friends, and it grew like 100% organically. It was like the right time and the right place. There really was a need at the time, so it didn't feel like a struggle to like, ooh, how do I entice people to come and join? It was just like they were coming, and I was like, ooh, it just felt quite easy, to be honest, in a way. And I say that not lightly, because I think often the advice is, oh, this is an easy business strategy. This is how you easily grow your audience and blah, blah. And I don't think most things in business are not easy. And so this was 2015. Facebook was a different place, communities were a different place. So there was a lot of ease in it. Didn't mean that there wasn't, like, I also put a lot of work into it. Nowadays, I think it could be much more difficult to just grow something like that from scratch, especially because if there's more competition out there already, it'll be harder to stand out. But we were the first community, so there wasn't really anybody else doing it.
It is a testament kind of to this idea of when you find a niche that is really undertapped that people are not serving, and people you experienced this directly. I'm sure you had friends as well, female friends that were like, we need something like this. So you tapped into that niche before everyone got there. And then it is easier, I think, when you have something that people really want, that really creates those feelings of safety and acceptance and helping someone explore. it's an easier community, I agree, than if you were creating like, let's say I just wanna create a marketing community, right? You know, that's a little bit more challenging than tapping into those feelings. When was the moment when you were like, "Oh my gosh, this is huge. I didn't expect this," or, "Wow, this is really bigger than I thought it was gonna be?"
It was a year after I started D&G. So I started in the summer of 2015, and it, like I said, it grew really organically. We reached 1,000 members pretty quickly, and it was just growing. Like everybody was inviting their friends and so on. And really early on, I started hosting meetups. So I was in Thailand, so we had a little meetup in Chiang Mai and posted a photo of that in the group. And then people went, "Hang on, we want to do a meetup as well." And so they were popping up all around the world, like in South America, like in Europe, everywhere. People were meeting in person from these connections that they had made in an online community, which is really special because I believe strongly that like virtual online communities are super important. We don't have those to replace in person communities. I think they go hand in hand. So to see that that was kind of spilling over and people were actually meeting in person was lovely. And then what happened was that people were coming to the meetups and they were like, "Well, that's all nice, but we want to meet for longer. Can you put like something together for us? Let's meet for a week somewhere, like a retreat." And I'm like, I'm a scientist. I've never organized a retreat. I don't think I've even been to one at that point. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's figure that out. And ended up hosting a first retreat in 2016. It was just a month after, no, a year after I started DNG. So a year and a month. And we had just hit 5,000 people then in the community. And I found a co-living space in Spain in Javea called Sun and Co. And we did our first retreat there and two more then. And yeah, there were 14 of us from 10 different countries who had come for a week to spend together with basically strangers from the internet. And there was a moment where we were sitting in the courtyard, all of us just chatting and exchanging and supporting. And I just thought, wow, I think this is something. And I was freelancing at the time. Like D&G was never I'd never intended it as a business. That wasn't really my idea behind it. I wasn't quite that strategic. So yeah, at that moment I was like, oh my God, I think this could be something and I really want to try.
And it makes more sense when you say how it grew because it's true, there's the virtual element is important, but there's nothing that replaces having that in-person option that you were saying. Like they even if you don't go to these retreats, but just knowing that was an option, seeing those people meet together physically, it creates a deeper connection to the community than if it were only virtual. And I think for people listening considering this, that's a really important part. Whether that's retreats or just a one-stop event, just something where you can physically see people. And I love the point about like, I didn't intend this to be a business because I think sometimes that's when your greatest passion comes through, your greatest creativity, because you're not stuck on monetizing it from the beginning. You just want to create those connections.
That's something I wanted to say as well about like how did you start it? How did it grow? Well, it was all very organic. And I mean, I put a lot of work into it, right? Like I had so many ideas. We had like themed days and different like events and like just I interviewed people. Like there was lots going on and I created blog posts and like resources. Like I put a lot of work into it, but I didn't have anything to sell in that first year at all. I just literally, because it wasn't a business, I didn't have anything to sell. Felt really low pressure. It wasn't like, oh, what am I signing up for here? It was just like, hey, come and hang, right? And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, right? Like if we have businesses, we have to build audiences, communities can be very helpful. But because it wasn't doing that at the time, I think it was just very, yeah, easy, chill kind of vibe. And then, yeah, the irony is not lost on me that I start a virtual community for a very online audience, right? Digital Nomad Girls. And the first thing ever I create, like the first product or offering I have is an in-person event, not an online course or an ebook or whatever. So a lot of people told me, no, you're doing it all wrong. You need to sell them a course. And I'm like, but I don't want to.
When you get a group, a community like that, the standout feature is not the most obvious one. For you, the standout feature was they're all online. So, yeah, it makes sense to do digital products. But the standout thing is actually they are craving connection. Because if they are nomadic or they want to be, the one thing that is always challenging, and anyone who's traveled knows this, is that it's making friends, it's finding people who understand you. It's feeling like you're not lost. It's the planning, it's all that stuff. And that is the greater need, even though you could look at it and be like, oh, yeah. I mean, this is the tech bro stuff coming in, right? That would be the, oh, let's do this, this, and this and scale you up.
It's not about the connection with me. Like, yes, they need to know me because there's some kind of like trust building there because I'm the one inviting them and offering them like, hey, come and join us in this group or at this retreat. But what it's really about is about the connection between each other. So you kind of like, my job was to facilitate that and to help them meet each other, not just meet me and go, hey, look at me. Like, I didn't know anything else. I started the community because I had all these questions. And the people joining had also had questions, and some had some answers and others had others. So it was all about that exchange.
That's a really important distinction because when you create a community, especially if you're doing it from the lens of, I have a business and I want this to be monetized, it's very easy to think about it as like a pyramid structure of, I am at the top and my posts are the ones that need to be read and responded to. But the most successful ones aren't like that. The most successful ones is everyone underneath that pyramid, right? Is chatting and having a conversation, and you are just facilitating, as you said, and you're creating that space, but you don't have to be the pinpoint all the time for every single interaction.
Yeah, and that is, I think that's the hard part to get right, like to get that balance right. Because for the longest time I didn't want to be the focus at all. So suddenly I was in charge of running this community for women. I felt really intimidated. I was like, oh my God, I don't know enough about feminism. I was like reading up, like I felt so underprepared. Like I didn't see myself as any kind of leader in this situation. It took me years to really start also embracing that role. So as much as it's not just like, hey, look at me, when you gather people and you bring people together and you build a community, there also has to be a certain amount of leadership that happens, because otherwise you're just like letting people up to their own devices, and that's not really fair either. So I think it's finding that balance has been interesting, challenging, worthwhile, yeah, and ongoing, I would say.
What are some of your suggestions on this in terms of creating some structure, even if it's a little bit looser, so people feel like this is a casual community, but still with a very much an intent? And I think, too, the big question I had sent you before that I really am curious about is creating a space where it's not just about the transactional interactions of others, someone trying to sell something or someone just asking a question and not contributing. Like, what were some of the safeguards or things that you found over the years that really helped to create that kind of interactive safe space?
This has been a lot of trial and error and experimentation, but right from the beginning, when I started the Facebook group, I used to always joke because my accent is weird. I'm sure people can tell. I'm part German, part British, and I always joke like, "Oh, this is German Jenny," because I have quite a lot of rules when you join, right? Like, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do, and this is how we want to be together. And I had that right from the beginning. Even like as I started the community, well, obviously this evolved massively, but from the beginning, posts had to be approved, and we said, "Well, don't spam and don't do this and be nice to each other," and so on. And I think often people don't like that. They're like, "Oh, people, we don't have to have all these rules. We can trust people." I'm like, "Yeah, but also it makes people feel more comfortable to know what they're supposed to be doing here and whatnot, right? Like giving them really clear guidelines, like this is okay and this is not okay, and this is what we encourage and this is what you'd rather not do, is actually really helpful. But I think the most important is to actually listen to your community and listen to the people. Because like I said, I didn't actually know what I was doing. I had been part of other communities and I'd seen a lot of stuff that I liked or didn't like. But from the beginning, I it was always an ongoing conversation with my community, like, hey, I had this idea, and what do you think about that? And then they'd go like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that." Or actually, we'd rather do so and so. Or could like that's how the retreat started. People told me they wanted to gather. It wasn't me like, haha, I had this idea and let's see if I can sell it to them. It was like they came to me and said, can you make that happen? And I went, oh, I'll try, right? So having that ongoing conversation and actually asking people what they want is really important, instead of just assuming that you know what they want, because often it's completely different. Put a post up and ask, or when you're talking to someone on Zoom or whatever, just ask. People are going to tell you all sorts of things, right? It also needs to still align with what you want to do. You can't make everybody happy, and that is one of the hardest parts, when you realize like, okay, some people want this, but I can't do that, or I don't want to do that.
In the beginning, it's easy when you're just creating to accept all ideas, especially when it's a smaller group. But as it gets bigger, not all ideas are going to necessarily work. And some of them too might be really time consuming, but they don't actually add a lot of value. And so you have to really prioritize what's the feedback that can really help them and create this experience and what's not. And I appreciate that too, because I know as a founder, I've kind of sometimes I learn and do things a certain way. And it's been interesting to see, which is obvious, but you forget that people are different. And so they need to see things in a different way or structured a different way because not everything is gonna resonate the way you think it should be, which makes sense when you hear it, but, like, it's a hard thing to step out of.
The other lesson is, and this is something that I think we've all learned now on the being on the internet as long as we have been, right? Is like you can't make everybody happy. There will always be some people who are not going to like what you do or are going to feel entitled to something that that you're doing or not doing. That was a really difficult lesson for me, like especially around pricing when it comes to business, because like I said, at first I didn't have anything to sell. I didn't study business or anything like that. I was making everything up as I went, right? Like it was all a huge experiment to me. For example, when I launched the first retreat, right? I charged, I think it started at 400 euros for a week. Talking about undercharging, like I have made all of those mistakes. It was incredible. This was including like accommodation, some of the food, like it was insane. I don't even know how I put that together at that price and still even managed to make a little bit of profit. So I'm not like some kind of like business genius. But the lesson here was, first of all, even at the retreat, everybody sat me down afterwards and said, Jenny, you need to charge more for this. This is, no. And this has happened honestly after every retreat. But at the same time, as I was charging 400 euros for a week in Spain, there were people who said that's too expensive and how dare I? So it doesn't really matter what you're doing. There will be some people who don't like it. Same when from after that retreat, I then had the idea to build my membership community, which is, I'm kind of running DNG as like the umbrella, but my membership community, the lab, is my business now. And when I launched that, I charged $17 a month. And again, some people did not like that. They were like, that is absolutely outrageous. How dare you charge that much? My price is now $100 a month. And it took me 7 years to get here, or 5 years to get here. But there will always be some people who think they don't like it, and other people will go, oh, you could charge more for that. So this is a really difficult thing to get right and to start feeling okay with not making everybody happy, especially as women. I think it's so difficult because we have been brought up to try to please everyone.
And also, with the pricing point is a really big one too, in terms of being women, because when I've said prices and I've shared them with male friends that are entrepreneurs, they're always like, that should be 3 times as much. They didn't even bat an eye. That should be 3 times as much. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I already thought it was, a certain price." But I think that that's a good point, is that there will always be someone who says it's too expensive. I've had people say that my $10 unlimited fitness membership when I had it was too expensive. So it's like you can't like you can't win completely. So you really do have to think of how can you take care of yourself and your people? What's that price point? What was some of the products that you created that when you started monetizing it a bit more that took off, that did well? I know the retreats obviously is one of them. Has there been other things that people asked for that you noticed the need for that have been the ones that people keep coming to?
To be honest, I haven't actually created as many products as I think a lot of people would expect or a lot of people might have done. I think there are some good and bad sides to that. I've had people tell me from the beginning, Jenny, you're leaving money on the table. That's become one of my absolute pet peeves. Of course I am. I'm leaving money on the table all the time because I could be doing XYZ and I'm not doing all the things. The thing that has been going the longest is the lab. That's my membership community. When I launched it, it was called the Inner Circle. I rebranded it a few years ago for different reasons. And it is a nod to my science background, but it's also a place where we come together and we experiment. That's been going for 6.5, nearly 7 years. Sometimes that still blows my mind because it also feels like it's just been yesterday when I started it. And I have some members in there who have been there from the beginning. So the idea from that came at the first retreat because it was wonderful. We had these moments and I was like, oh my God, this is it. And here we are. And then we all went our own ways, our separate ways. And it was like, oh no, now I'm lonely again. And I was traveling a lot at the time. So I always had to like reintroduce myself, go to new co-working space, meet people. But you're not only introducing yourself, you're also introducing your work. And when you're building a business and running a business, you need support. You cannot do this by yourself. It is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly scary. It's very emotional. It's a huge roller coaster. So that's when I had the idea for the membership, because I was like, I just don't want to always start from scratch. I want to have my friends who know my business, who like come with me everywhere. So that's been the most stable thing. I did launch a course eventually. People have been telling me to start a course. Honestly, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with that. I'm proud of the content that's in it. It's called Stop Dreaming, Start Packing. I don't actually like the name. I never did like it. It was one of those where I took a course on how to start a course, which was good, but I was kind of nudged in that direction, like make it sound like, this sounds like very sensational. I wanted to call it like the no nonsense guide to being a digital nomad. Anyway, the funny part is that it took me worked for 2 months straight on building that course, and then I launched it in March of 2020.
Oh,
And
go
it's called yeah, it's called Stop Dreaming, Start Packing, and it was so ironic. So I put so much work and energy in it, and then I launched it into a pandemic. It's pretty hilarious in hindsight. People still bought it, people still liked it, but yeah, and that was a really good example of having to listen to the audience because I pre-sold it like, like, "Oh, this is coming in March, you can sign up now." But I was like trying to be like, "Oh, I think what people want is like they want support. So we'll have like weekly calls and we'll have this and we'll have that and they'll have like access to me and like Q&As." And then I charged $400, I think, for that. And people didn't buy it. I launched it and literally nobody bought it. And I was like, oh, what happened? And I was like, do people like, do you just want the course? Do you not want any of the other stuff? And they're like, yeah, no, we don't want the other stuff. We just want the course. And I'm like, okay, cool. Here's $200. Have it. So it's again, one of those like situations where I had to ask people what they actually wanted because I went got ahead of myself. It's been quite minimalist when it comes to my offerings, which is kind of interesting because I also have ADHD, which I only found out 4 years ago. So I have a lot of ideas. I want to do a lot of different things, but these are the things I've stuck with. And it's interesting that I managed to find a business model, the membership model, like this recurring membership that despite kind of hating structure and consistency and all of that has been working really well for me. I love it because I can be very creative within that model. So I don't know if that answered your question. I think I went a little bit off, but
No, it does answer and then some because I was gonna ask you next about the membership specifically because I had joined DNG when you were just launching that, I remember just before, a few maybe 6 months before, because I had joined pre-pandemic, and I remember seeing it, so it's interesting to see how that has evolved, and I think to this point of it's hard for us to focus in general, like independent of anything, I'm sure for you, especially because you have so many ideas and you're so creative. But when you do, it allows you to grow so much more. And if you can find something like you have that allows you to experiment within, like the membership, you can have your 100 ideas and put them in through one thing instead of always trying to build, launch, grow 100 different things.
absolutely. And I think this is one of the examples. Like I'm really grateful that I stumbled kind of into this business model or stumbled. I chose it and it worked, right? It could have also started and it didn't work for me. And I know there are a lot of people I've seen communities come and go because people think they want to run this and then they get bored or they find it too much pressure to always have to be there every month and host this session. And for me, I don't know, there's something about it that I find really relaxing. And again, I can be creative within.
The finding personalizing your business to you is something that I think is so underrated and so important because you can get all of these courses on how to do etc, and I think it's very valuable information, but at the end of the day you have to customize it to you, to your lifestyle, to what you like, to what your customers want, and your course was a great example of the traditional way to do it, right? Is you have this, then the regular calls, the Q&A, the hot seat, etc. But for your people, they didn't want all of that. And I think listening to what does your audience want, but also what do you want to do for your lifestyle is really important. If you're not someone who wants to show up on calls every month, then you 100% shouldn't be doing that, right? It's not going to be sustainable. So now it's been 9 years, really amazing long time. How are you thinking about it in terms of what you want to do next, in terms of how you want to evolve? Have you thought about what maybe the next stage is for you?
Oh man, have I? Yes, I've been thinking about that for a good few years. I've had my own little ups and downs through it. I actually had a burnout last year, which I think a lot of us have experienced since the pandemic. And a lot of it had to do with, oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm not a digital nomad. I'm not a traveler anymore. I have a home base now. So that has been a huge shift. Like the pandemic was happening. I had this ADHD diagnosis, this identity shift was happening, all of these things at once, which was a lot at once. So to figure out. And I'm now starting to travel a little bit more again. So that's nice. I think I'm finding a sweet spot or like a comfortable space where I'm like, you know what? I don't actually have to figure everything out 100%.
Thinking about the community that you would create, what's one thing you would have focused on more, less, or introduced sooner, do you think?
One of the things I would recommend people not do is rely too heavily on social media to build whatever they're building. D&G was a Facebook group. That's how it started. And and I also had an Instagram account that I had huge amounts of fun with from the beginning, and it grew very organically, and now you just don't get the reach anymore. Like it's I said it's not just about, "Hey, look at me," but If you're the one running the community and you put a post up of something that you're really excited about, that you think the community is going to be really excited about, or even just asking a question, and the algorithms simply don't show it to anyone, it's so disheartening, you know? So I feel like don't put all your eggs in the social media basket. It's just not reliable. We don't It's just not what these platforms are made for. They're not made for us. They're made for the people who own them to get rich. So, you know, having worked for Mark Zuckerberg for free for 9 years, it's not that much fun. I feel like I wish I had built more of my own kind of content outside of the community, outside of social media. And to be honest, I think the most important thing has nothing to do with any of the technical or business stuff. It's just believing in yourself. It's been 9 years, and I feel like I'm maybe just now starting to actually believe that I have something, that I'm worthy of what I've built here. I think the mindset, the emotional side of running a business has always been the hardest thing for me. I wish I had just been a bit kinder to myself maybe and just believed more in what I'm doing is good enough.
What you were creating and how you were showing up as an outsider, of me seeing it, it was really inspirational. And it was always the feeling of like, I want to do that too. And I want to be like that. But I know when you're in it, it's hard. It's really hard. And you feel that isolation. And it is emotion. I think the actual running a business is not difficult. What is hard is the emotions. That is the hard part. That is why people fail and don't begin again. It's not because they didn't learn a marketing tool or etcetera. It has nothing to do with that.
No, I fully agree with that. And it's like, you know, a membership business, new members come in, yay! Sometimes members leave. And it breaks my heart. And I know it shouldn't, because it's not personal. And these are lovely people. And often they just moved on or whatever, but it makes me sad. I feel everything in my business. And it's a lot of work to learn how to manage that.
If you are someone who's working remotely, whether for someone else or your business, I want to encourage them to find you, to join your community. It makes you feel heard and validated, and it gives you so much resources, even if you're not traveling. Can you share a little bit of how they can connect with you?
The Facebook group, it's still there. It's called Digital Nomad Girls Community. You can also sign up to my newsletter, check out if maybe the lab is a good fit for them. So that's my membership community, which is the paid one. Come to one of our free events or send me a message and we can chat.
It is a community that feels super supportive. So I think if you just even just take a glimpse, see what it's about. Also, I want to thank you for being here, sharing your story, but also for creating what you have. I know you probably hear it a lot, but it personally has changed so much in my life. And I know that it has for other people too.
That's really kind. And I'm getting better at taking that compliment instead of going, no, it's nothing.